Welcome to Sports Card Academy, everyone, where we talk with sports card market experts to learn more about their collecting, investing, and the thought process behind it. And tonight we are talking to Phil. You all know him as Philmington. He is the creator of the Rookie Card Explosion Box, the best baseball hobby subscription boxes you can find in the market today. But Phil's channel is much more than that. He is one of the hobby's premier flippers and produces content that weaves together wax, slabs, market dynamics, and everything in between. Without further ado, welcome aboard, Mr. Philmington. Yes.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we'll jump right into it. Tell our viewers out there a little bit about your hobby background, what you started collecting, and sort of where your collecting and your investing lies today.
Well, I really started to get back into it in probably 2014. Like most of us in our general age bracket, we collected when we were kids. So did I. I loved it. I loved specific players, like Ken Griffey Jr. is one of my favorites. Just back then, reading the newspaper, checking his stats after every game. Of course, the Mariners were never really televised unless we got lucky on Sunday night or against the Red Sox. But it was just a natural draw for me because I was very passionate about baseball. I love statistics. So again, the newspapers, looking at the backs of cards, and that drew me into fantasy baseball, which is probably what ended up bringing me back many years later in my late 20s. Again, like 2014 is when I started to hit up eBay, buy stuff here and there. That's when I made all the typical, mistakes, amateur mistakes, picking up the wrong stuff, the wrong grades, the wrong cards, not really doing a good job analyzing prices and understanding what market value is and where the arbitrage opportunities are. I wasn't thinking about that stuff. I was just kind of impulse buying, and every day there'd be a new package in the mail and I'd be like, this is pretty cool. And eventually all that, added up, and I'm like, wow, at the time I spent like $5,000 on cards over the course of like a year. And I'm like, I started to sell them a little bit, and I'm like, ooh, man, those eBay fees are harsh.
Yeah.
So again, and then learning through the mistakes by selling, you definitely learn a lot when you first start to sell, when to sell, how to sell, where to sell. And I took a little bit of a hiatus, but I'd be buying stuff here and there for the next like 2-3 years. And then it probably wasn't until the middle of 2018 where I really got back into it hard. At that point, I had a pretty nice collection of Bowman Chrome autographs of some of my favorite players that I was following at the time. Was Alex Bregman. Not my favorite player anymore.
No.
To say, but and more recently, over the last year or two, I've gotten more serious into like the long-term investing versus just the flipping. Time horizons are a little bit longer now. From a monetary standpoint, I seem to be doing a little bit better with those returns, but a lot of that is because of the market, the conditions today, versus me doing anything really, innovating from the buying and selling perspective. To be humble there, but so now I've gotten into some other sports. I bought my first basketball card like this January. I don't think I had purchased one for like over 20 years. I'm also looking at maybe some other sports. As you know, I've dabbled a little bit in Pokemon. I did some of that last year, so I timed that pretty well. Doing a little bit of soccer, doing a lot of sealed wax, which, as you know, I have a business reason to be buying that. And I also have my own personal stash. So it's just really interesting. There's a lot to like about it. And it seemed like it seemed a lot more speculative 2 or 3 years ago when I didn't really know what I was doing. But I feel like the more people that have come in, the more prices have gone up. The more like investors and flippers and quote unquote institutional investors that are becoming into the market, hedge funds and et cetera. Like it just seems like it's not a foolish waste of money like I thought it was back in 2014.
Well, you hit on a bunch of stuff there we're going to talk about in our conversation tonight. You had mentioned mistakes early on. I got a couple of binders over there of Gypsy Queen and Allen and Ginter sets that I thought would retain value in the long term. But at the end of the day, it was something that made me happy. And that's what's most important in the hobby. It sounds like for you, it's the chase. It's finding the next thing and being able to flip. It's finding that guy to add to a quote unquote portfolio of long-term investment holds. But what we're trying to accomplish here tonight is to break down those barriers so that if you are just getting into the hobby, you've only been in there for a couple months, let's coach you through avoiding the same mistakes that you and I made along the way to shorten that curve, learn some tips and tricks along the way. You had mentioned your business venture, the Rookie Card Explosion Box. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Rookie Card Explosion Box got started and what it was like to sort of buy your first case, a sealed product, and find new customers and where it is today?
Yeah. So I started watching YouTube content, not coincidentally, when I got back into the hobby hard, probably mid to late 2018. And that's really what's made it a lot more sticky to me.
Yeah.
The relationships, people like you that I've met along the way, just enjoying showing off your cards, and just there's a ton of pure collector type personalities on YouTube that had really drawn me in at the time, even though I was a little bit different for me at the get-go. I think I admitted this in one of my first 5 videos that it's more about the money to me.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few people that might admit that, but I don't consider myself a full breed investor. I definitely have a lot of collector traits as well. But back to your question, though, the Rookie Card Explosion Box was actually something that when I started to watch content, I was like, oh, okay. There was I think it's something called the Loot Locker and the Card Crate were two of the ones that I had heard about at the time. The original Boombox might have been around back then. And I was watching some of my favorite YouTubers at the time open these products. Silver Jackify was one of them. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But what would make that more interesting as a viewer to watch? Like maybe different packs, maybe with a different theme.
Yeah.
And then what would be more fair for the customer, and what would the customer actually want to open? So you think about like transparency, everybody getting the same products, even if you have 8,000 subscribers versus a guy that doesn't even make videos, that doesn't have a social media presence.
Yeah.
And treating everybody fairly, because at the end of the day, every customer is worth the same. They all pay the same amount. And I started to really think like, I could do a similar product, but I could differentiate myself and just execute it so much better by adding transparency. I talked about the theme of the packs. So one of the things that really no other rookie card or subscription product does is mix in like a ton of different time periods. Usually it'll have either like an 80s focus or like a modern focus, but I'm like, I mean, baseball collectors, they were huge in the 90s. So of the people that have come back to collect baseball cards, it's got a pretty high proportion of those that came back because they're nostalgic, like myself, like you, that collected when they were kids. So who wouldn't want to open a pack of 85 Donruss, 82 Tops? I mean, seems like pretty cool. So I mixed in the vintage component with mostly modern stuff, the stuff that's easier to acquire. Nowadays, it's harder for the stuff that I'd like to include, but everybody gets the same packs, of course, and I make it rookie card focused. So unlike any other subscription product out there, I'm not trying to shit on them or anything, but I feel like unless it's like a filler pack, which I've had to include because the rising increase of wax is just unavoidable, every pack I try to feature somebody who's hot. Maybe somebody who just switched teams in the off season, somebody who's having a really good month, maybe some emerging, maybe some undervalued type players, maybe an undervalued product that I expect to go up. So I'm always thinking about like who are the most relevant players of that time and trying to time it from that perspective. And it was something that I couldn't really succeed in doing at the beginning. Since I've acquired so much inventory, since I've sourced a lot of product and I'm sitting on a lot of product, I'm able to be a little bit more flexible in doing so. So part of that was basically half of the impetus for me starting was, oh yeah, this might be a legitimate business idea. Let's see if it goes anywhere. The other part of that was, I mentioned YouTube. I wanted to, I was a little jealous, envious at the time. I was a newer YouTuber. Nobody was watching my videos, getting 10 to 15 views. I mean, you know the way it is back then.
Hey,
not now, but the way it was. And I was like, I got like 80 subscribers. I'm gaining like, 2 or 3 a week. I'm watching all these other channels and they've got like, their content's okay. It's not like amazing. Like I want to be up there with them. And clearly a lot of it is because of longevity. A lot of it is because of networking. A lot of it's because they created better videos than me. And I was like, this might be a way, even if this product fails, this could be a way for me to grow. So YouTube, giving you the free marketing and, giving away subscription boxes and people kind of opening them up and other people seeing that and want to buy one for themselves. That was like a perfect way for me to market the product, but also I could hopefully grow my reputation and my brand, if you will, through YouTube by giving away some free boxes and seeing if this product would take off. And fortunately, starting with 36 boxes, I actually didn't sell out the very first month, which was January of last year. And now we're on month 23 coming up. And I've had to expand 5 times already, going up gradually, adding 36 subscriptions, adding 36 subscriptions. And I mean, I can't make enough of them at this point. Like I'm kind of tapped out from a capacity perspective unless I hire help. Where I'm like, I kind of want to stay where I am. This is fun. The more you expand, the more you risk diluting the product because it becomes more difficult to source product at that same price points. I've learned a lot and I've been able to buy products from different places where I'm able to save a little bit. I've built some relationships and so I'm able to avoid some of the big box stores where a lot of people have to go. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's only so much product out there, especially when you're not trying to include all the new stuff, that just got printed. And, the boombox, I think they're probably like a top 2 or 3 product as well. They include Bowman Chrome, some of the stuff I don't. But there's really not a whole lot of variety, which is another one of the components that I like to throw in there. Very rarely will you see a sub box with 8, 9 different years worth of products in it. Last year, I featured 71 unique products across the 12 lineups. Like, where else would you see that? Usually it's not the same products every month, but for the other more mainstream sub boxes or less mainstream sub boxes, you'll see like, there won't be a whole lot of turnover. Maybe like 2 or 3 packs will turn over a month. And I'm also including more packs, which I think makes it more cool, even though there's up to this point, I haven't included any jumbo packs. I just think it's really cool that people are able to kind of open stuff that they haven't opened before and chase reviews that they haven't chased before.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that people have different tastes and there's something out there for everyone. And when you are entering into the space, you identified a gap in that market and you decided to fill it. But before we hop into some more sports card specific, single specific research talk, I want you to touch a little bit upon the decision to actually commit and buy the product, because a lot of the themes we're going to talk about here today is the entrepreneurial spirit and having the courage to take that first step. And I know it would be a pretty big discussion if I were to tell my wife, like, I want to start a subscription box for baseball cards and I got to take 10 to 15 grand and commit and put that towards it. So I know it's not for everyone, but I want you to sort of share with the viewers what your thought process is. And are you risk averse at all into sort of taking those different steps in those new adventures?
Well, I can't give away all my secrets, but what I would say is one of the reasons why a lot of people have asked me, oh, why don't you try football or why don't you get into basketball? Well, there's a lot of reasons why I'm not willing to do that. And one of them is because there's a learning curve required to understand the products, to understand the prices to pay for those products, how they appreciate over time, not to mention the players within those products that are ultimately driving that value. So, and especially you're dealing with multiple manufacturers. I know Topps, where football and basketball is probably a lot easier to cross over. So there's other reasons why I wouldn't want to do it, because it's just it wouldn't be as fun for me to watch the videos, etc. But with baseball, one of the things that I would recommend, and this is for people that just acquire wax and keep it sealed, it would apply to those people too. But you want to look at data from previous years of those sets. You want to see, what changed. What are the variables that are different from last year versus this year? Has the print run changed? Well, it's not going to be published, but what do you know? What do the people on Blowout think? What are the superfractor odds? How have they increased the manufacturer's scarcity component of adding different inserts, like the gold foil parallel that happened with this year's jumbo Topps flagship boxes? You have to think about if the checklist is different. For Topps Chrome, Bowman Chrome, it's a lot of the values derived from the autograph. So have the autograph subjects changed? It's and also, like, how has the market value fluctuated over time for that product? Where did it start? There's a good chance that the hobby boxes of this year for any given Topps product could be 30%, 50%, double, even 150% more than last year's prices. So you have to also consider that. Why would you pick up this year's product unless the checklist was markedly better? In some cases, it might be, when last year's product might be close to the same price, or 2 years ago, like with 2018 Series 1, good checklist. The print run is lesser, and there's a lot fewer of those sealed boxes still out there, one would think. So you kind of have to consider a lot of different variables. With the rookie card explosion box, you used to be a subscriber. I hate you.
Time out.
Yeah.
We're trying to pick up cards to make our collection full and whole and make ourselves feel whole inside. And the rookie card explosion box treated me well over the last year or so.
So with the rookie card explosion box, and you've seen this too, I like to include some of the same products: the Topps Heritage, the Topps Flagship, which is Series 1, Series 2, an update, Topps Chrome, Bowman. I have kind of my staple products, and there's a reason for that. And it's not just because I want to pass on nice value to my customers, but it's also if, this thing goes belly up and, we dive, really deep into a recession and I lose a ton of subscribers, or there's just a ton of competition, who knows? Or I do something stupid, I'm in the newspaper, and people just start to unsubscribe. I don't want to be stuck with product that doesn't go anywhere. And also, as I've been building up my stash more and more, it helps me to have appreciating product, because there's an opportunity cost of me holding that product and not including it right away.
I think you said something really important there, and it was know what you're dealing with. Do the research ahead of time to make sure that you don't get burned. A perfect example of that is Topps Chrome Sapphire this year. They had the configuration is virtually the same as last year. 8 packs, 4 cards a pack, 32 cards. Only this year, it was $300, and last year the same box was $50. So if you're going out and you're spending $300 on that box, you need to be aware that that box was $50 last year. So did Topps really increase the value of the cards they're giving you sixfold? Or did they see the margins that people were getting on the secondary market and said, we want some of that cheddar. We're going to increase the price and we're going to capitalize on those profits. If you're in it to rip and flip, like, all the more power to you. Just know the risks as you're approaching acquiring those types of products. So I think you said something really powerful there about learning a player's market or a product's market by looking at what the first Bowman Chrome autos are doing for that particular player. Now, what if you end up in a situation sort of like basketball, how Prism and Optic Hollows are like, they're sort of fighting for the top spot in collectors' eyes. Maybe I'm too far away from Prism basketball and I'm making a fool out of myself. But if Bowman Chrome and First Bowman Chrome autos lost their sort of title to the throne, how would you sort of pivot to make sure you're getting all that market information that you're seeking out, but you're making sure that you're using sort of the latest and greatest of collectors' desires?
Yeah, I think it would take a little bit for that to happen. And I think that shift has actually started to occur because of the lack of affordability of the Bowman product, the lack of rip value of the Bowman product, and just the influencers out there are pumping base cards, which generally won't be Bowman. I guess they could be Bowman base. And that's probably one of the reasons why the Bowman non-autograph first cards have done very well this year.
Yeah.
But if that were to happen, I mean, I think you've got to look at flagship. You got to be careful with flagship because there's a lot of low-end flagship cards that get ridiculous multipliers when they're graded. With Bowman Chrome, and the card stock's going to be usually generally nicer with Bowman Chrome, so you have a better chance to get a better grade. So that warrants a smaller multiplier, but you might see like 1.5 times 2 for PSA 10 versus raw, times for the newer stuff, maybe like times 2.5. You can see that. For the older stuff, it would be probably a little bit more than that. But I mean, like Austin Meadows in a PSA 10, even though he's struggling right now, is probably selling for like 30 times more than what he'd sell for raw. So you just have to be a little bit careful, because when you start to compare him in the graded form versus other guys that are graded that actually have a raw card that it's actually worth something more than $15, you just have to be a little bit careful from that perspective. But I mean, what you have to your advantage is there's no real standard way to look at it. And I think everybody else is at the same disadvantage in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's definitely a differentiator. You can come from it at a bunch of different angles, people looking to answer the same question and come up with an infinite number of different answers. And I guess that's what the beauty of the hobby is. There's a lane for everyone. There's a niche for everyone. And we're just all trying to figure it out in this crazy, crazy world.
Yeah. At some point when the tools available to buyers gets better, right now, a lot of it's focused on like the last 90 days and pricing trends, and card ladder's doing a little bit of technical analysis. There's probably some more analytics that'll come from market movers eventually. I don't know, but once there's more tools out there, there probably will be. And I keep on thinking about like parallels to asset management or fintech and the tools at their disposal, and having benchmarks and composites. And I mean, there's not to go down a rabbit hole, but I feel like buyers will be in a place to make more educated decisions in the future. And the tools available to them, I don't know if they'll be more expensive, but I know there's going to be a hell of a lot more competition that will be putting some pricing pressure on the people that are out there now.
That's a great point. And I want to give a plug to a video that you and JT from Triple Crown 24 put out. You guys had a great conversation about a bunch of different topics, but you covered the eBay API and sort of how the biggest detriment in the hobby, the biggest concern, is the inavailability of standardized data across all platforms that's readily accessible to customers. And Card Ladder and market movers are doing a lot to bridge that gap. This eBay API drama is a little bit concerning, but you see lots of institutional money. You see fractional ownership with collectible. You see the NBA licensing highlights out through Top Shot and issuing it on the blockchain. There's the start of innovation coming into the hobby. So it's going to be very, very interesting 5 years from now if there's going to be a sports card mutual fund that Joe Schmo or Joe Smith can, I don't want to say talk to their Fidelity advisor and buy a share in, but much more accessible to the average collector. So you had some great points there.
Yeah. It's crazy when you think about it, but it's so true that the more we get into securitization, the direction that, sports cars are heading into is securitization of that and treating it like an asset, like an investment. It's 100% correlated with the need for better data, more timely data, more accurate data, more complete data. We look at eBay right now as the gospel, but most people generally only have access to the last 90 days unless they want to do some hunting and pecking. But and that's okay for a lot of people that have short time horizons, and a lot, especially in the post-COVID world, a lot of transactions are happening online. But pretty soon, there's going to be pressure from regulators. I mean, fractional investing, there's going to be pressure from eventually like insurance companies, custodians, the people that run these apps. And I in that video with JT, I spoke about how asset management companies, their greatest cost after employees is usually data before it is technology. Data is cost. Bloomberg terminals, FactSet, all the indices, benchmarks, reference data, constituents, list goes on and on. So I think eventually, we're not mature yet. If you look at like the industry on like an S curve, but at some point we're going to get pretty close to that. And at some point data is going to become ginormous.
Data is king. And I think it speaks volumes for a hobby as large as ours is, that no one can accurately put their finger on what a market cap is for the hobby. We're in a couple group messages together and we've discussed it. Is it $5 billion? Is it $10 billion? With the influx of mainstream influencers, is that bumping it up to 12, 15? And then you get into hypothetical discussions like, oh, if you're trying to calculate the market cap of a particular card, if everything's out at the market at once, is it going to hold that value? Or are there enough buyers out there to sort of prop up the demand? But we won't go through an economics lesson tonight. Maybe that'll be on a future Sports Card Academy episode. But I do want to touch on your beginnings in the hobby. While I was prepping for tonight's conversation, I went back and watched some of your earliest videos where you were Phil from Philmington, not Philmington. But I noticed that a lot of the cards you were picking up and grading were vintage, and you started in vintage and you eventually made the jump to modern and focusing on Bowman Chrome. And I think that's what most people know you for, as the Bowman Chrome guru. So can you talk a little bit about how you made that leap and what went into researching modern cards versus where you were comfortable with in vintage?
At the time, I was just starting to become a sports card dealer. And this was before I really knew other dealers at all to ask them for advice. One of the things you find after you become a dealer is no dealer is going to give you free advice or any advice. They'll tell you probably what you shouldn't do, actually. But it was, a lot of it was just like me trying to mix up my inventory, and I had a big show coming up, and I'm like, well, I got 2 display cases and I want to fill them both. So I need forget how many graded cards fit into a display case, maybe 36 6x6 in the standard size. And so I need all these vintage cards, and it's something where if I was to do it again and gradually I stopped buying vintage, I probably wouldn't have gone in that direction. And it's not that I don't think that vintage has strong long-term investment potential, because I do. Mm-hmm. I do appreciate, in many of my recent videos, I've talked about downside risk and how to manage risk across your sports card allocation. And, if you compare a second-year Sandy Koufax card to a Juan Soto Bowman Chrome autograph, Holy Grail card for Soto, who I really like a lot. One of them has a greater likelihood of dropping 20% or more in the next 12 months, and that's not Sandy Koufax. So, but for myself, when I went into vintage, I spread myself a little too thin. Vintage comes, and I spoke about this a little bit earlier with different sports, vintage comes with a learning curve, and it's completely different. And especially now where I've gone into other sports to buy singles, it's very difficult to be the jack of all trades, to be the specialist of everything, and to maximize your profitability that way. And another thing other than profitability is the enjoyment factor. For me, We get a lot, like you. I think we both get a lot more pleasure of owning a game we can watch. Maybe we feel more emotionally connected to that player. For me, that's the way it works. I'd rather do that.
Mhm.
I touched about it a little bit earlier about how I was huge into fantasy baseball, and those are the types of the guys that I would target in fantasy that I'd like to have in my roster. I eventually bought some of those cards. Talked about Alex Bregman. But modern's just fun to me. And my holding periods are often between 6 to 9 months.
Mhm.
If I'm selling vintage in that time frame, my primary selling mechanism is through eBay. It's difficult to kind of make back that fee, the
Yeah.
13% or so. It's a lot easier to do that when you're dealing with more volatile cards. It's also a lot easier to to really lose your shirt with
Mhm.
modern cards on top of that 13 or so percent fee. So I don't know. It's just vintage just wasn't the best fit for me. But
Yeah.
again, nothing personal against vintage. I feel very strongly about vintage across many of the major sports.
Well, I think the big thing is having a personal connection with the player or the athlete. I'm thinking about my own collection, and I have a 1951 Bowman Ted Williams in a PSA 6. It was, I don't know, a $400 or $500 card, but it's like the crown jewel of my collection in my eyes. But the reason for that is because I did a shitload of research on Ted Williams, found out all about I think it was 1941, where he hit 406,
Yeah.
how he got absolutely robbed of the MVP a couple of years in a row, watched a bunch of YouTube clips and documentaries, and like that's how I formed the personal connection with him. But then I go and get like a Carlton Fisk graded card, graded rookie card. I forget what year it is, but it doesn't elicit the same emotional reaction versus you spend the same amount of money on a Dylan Carlson first Bowman Chrome, and now you got someone to root for the entire season, and you're invested in that. Is a Dylan Carlson first Bowman Chrome something that I want for my collection in the long term? Am I going to be as proud to own that as I am a 51 Ted Williams Bowman? No, but in the moment, I get so much more enjoyment out of investing in that player, not just monetarily, but emotionally, and following along with what they're doing on the playing field. So I think there's something different for everyone. There's history buffs that like the vintage stuff, and there's people like us that really like to just follow along with the modern athlete and see them perform on field. So let's transition to grading, something I know you do a lot of. Let's pretend that our listeners out there know nothing about grading. What is your argument for, one, the value of grading, and two, how someone can learn which cards to submit and which grading companies they should be submitting to?
So with grading, I think the value comes with, one, the authentication. For modern cards, it's not really much of an issue, and it might at some point. You might see more counterfeits out there. You see counterfeits with Mike Trout's, the rookie card, the US 175, and some of the more common cards, 93 Topps Jeter, obviously Michael Jordan rookie, Fleer rookie. But the main value you get is you get a professional opinion on the grade. You might not agree with it, but it's a third-party professional opinion, and it is it's held to high esteem. It's perceived.
Yeah,
It
you
has
got it.
it has a very strong perception in the marketplace for the secondary market. So with that comes the ability to have greater liquidity. If you own that card, it'll be easier to sell it, especially if you're selling stuff online, especially if you don't have the best reputation built up. You'll generally be able to sell it pretty easily if it's not the wrong card. But with that, you mentioned, what grading company should you use? Well, I think that depends on a couple things. Just to break down and make it simple, it depends on the era. So with vintage, and let's break this down to be a little more specific. So with pre-war cards, that's pre-World War One. SGC is probably just as strong, maybe not as strong, but they're up there with PSA in regards to resale value. You'll never really see Beckett cards that are that old. BBG, or I guess it would have to be BBG, the Beckett Vintage Service, because they're not very reputable with older cards. And it seems like pre-1990, that's when Beckett kind of fell down with maybe not being as strict versus PSA or even SGC. Now, SGC is still very acceptable for vintage cards that are post World War One. But I think their specialty is really cards that are over 100 years old.
Yeah.
To be fair. But still, they are very strict. They're very consistent, known to be for vintage. So 50s, 60s, even maybe 70s. Pre-1972 is what some people classify vintage as. Some people say pre-1980. Some people say pre-1990. Some people say pre-1984 or 85.
It all changes with time.
Right. Yeah. Vintage SGC is pretty strong, and you probably want to stay away from a Beckett slab. Unless, BGS pristine, if it's a card from the 80s, then I'm sure there'll be high demand for that. And then Beckett is really like 90s plus, but still, I mean, PSA is going to usually outsell, in most cases, the other two companies post 1990. SGC, they came pretty strong with they try to go after a lot of modern business this year. They were doing a pretty good job, but the resale values at this point don't really reflect too much of a change in their standing. So where their market share probably has increased, I'm not so sure. Like if you're to look at a 9.5, SGC 9.5 versus a PSA 9, you'll be that happy with what you see right now with some of the mid or high end cards that I've seen sales of recently. So another thing you want to look at with grading, though, is the condition of the card itself, because they all have different standards, and these aren't hidden. These are available on the company's websites. PSA is generally going to be a little bit more strict, I would say. That could be a subjective point of view, but I feel I'm being objective here with modern cards versus Beckett. And I'm comparing a PSA 10 versus a BGS 9.5 because a BGS 10 is a pristine, which doesn't have an equivalent with PSA. So having said that, though, Beckett is going to be a little bit more harsh with centering. So the other subgrades, PSA will be more strict, especially corners and then edges, and then surface probably a little bit more strict too. But Beckett's going to be a little bit more strict on the centering. So you're going to want to look at the card. Some people have the centering tools that help them understand that. I kind of just eyeball it. Some cards, it's hard to tell if it's centered or not. There's also standards for the reverse of the card as well that you'll need to look at. Again, PSA is more loose with equivalent grades versus Beckett. So for people that are getting into grading cards, I bought a ton of slabs when I got back from the hobby in 2014, but that gave me nothing, no knowledge, no edge on, what card should I be submitting and what grades are these going to get. You really have to go through the process of submitting your cards from the start, buying raw cards from eBay at shows, and really looking at that card, looking at its flaws under a loop or however you want to look at it with some good lighting. And then maybe documenting, this is what I think I'm going to get. Sometimes I have it in my head. And then when it comes back, okay, well, I didn't get the grade I wanted, but it was a little bit higher or lower. Usually it's going to be lower than what you expect when you're new to it. Oh, yeah, it looks gem in. It's out of the pack. Well, not in all cases. Maybe you'll have some friends point out, well, the top to bottom centering, most people's eyes are always drawn to the left, right. You got to pay attention to the top bottom too. It's just as important. That's a little off, or you missed a little bit of whiting on the corners, or, you paid attention to the surface. We didn't look at the edges. And with the surface, sometimes you've got to tilt the card all different ways. Oh, no. With the surface, with chrome surface cards, you're going to have factory dimples. You're going to have some people, you're going to have impressions. You're going to have roller marks, which are usually vertical. You're going to have scratches sometimes. And again, these are packed pulled cards. So a lot of stuff that can go wrong with the surface. Some strange marks that you can't wipe off. Look like grease stains. You just never really know.
Yeah. Well, if we have viewers that have never submitted before, I think they can go back and listen to the last 3 or 5 minutes. We just need to take that clip and broadcast it to the masses, because you just took us to school, Phil. Thank you very much.
You can edit out like half of that.
Yeah. Question for you on, you had mentioned that you started becoming a full-time dealer. One of the questions I got written down for you here is, how would you coach or talk to someone who's mentally preparing to hop into the next level of their collecting? And what I mean by that is someone who typically buys and sells cards in the $50 to $100 range, but they want to play ball in the next level, cards that are between 500 and 1,000, whether they have an intent to profit or they just want some nicer, more expensive, rare cards for their collection. Do you have any advice for those types of folks?
Yeah. Well, first of all, hopefully you have the capital for such an acquisition, because something that I see, and it's happened with me, it's happened with other people, like once you start buying mid-end, high-end cards, it's difficult to kind of retrace.
Yeah.
Sometimes you tend to try to outdo yourself, and like it's almost like a drug. Like, okay, I had this much dosage, but next time to get the same high, I gotta buy an even nicer card. And I've got the Bowman Chrome autograph and a PSA 9, but the refractor, that could be a good deal. That could be a good investment. I need that. So
Yeah.
you have to pay into bankroll management, how much money you have to spend. Hopefully you don't have a whole lot of debts that you're paying off, credit card debts, etc. But once you start to pay attention to those cards, what I say is, assuming you can afford it, think about the risk and return profile, or the return and risk profile of that card. Because there's going to be a lot of differences if you're used to buying $50 cards versus a $500 card. Generally, a more expensive card is going to be a little bit more rare. Not always, there's PSA 9 Luka Doncic prisms that are selling for a ton of money, probably north of 500 still, or maybe around there. And there's a whole lot of those. But buying a Bowman Chrome blue or gold refractor, it might be a little less liquid. It might be more difficult to sell. There might be fewer buyers out there that would want to buy that. But on the flip side, there's probably less downside risk with that card because it's more rare, because the market value isn't going to absolutely collapse when the PSA pops explode over the next 3 or 4 months. So you have to really consider all those aspects of that card you're buying. You also, ideally, you want to have a plan. How long am I going to own this card for? How am I going to sell it? Where am I going to sell it? And think about the fees, and think about, your ideal profit you want to make from that card. What are the market factors that are in place, or you expect to be in place, that will drive the market value of that card?
Excellent answer. I think there's a lot of people out there. Well, one disclaimer: do not go into credit card debt for sports cards. Do not put your financial house in order to buy little pieces of cardboard. That is not what we're telling you to do. If you're a serious collector, you're a serious investor, you want to flip your way into some money, be deliberate about it. Do the research and know the risks that you're taking when you're buying and selling. I feel like, especially over the last 6 to 8 months in the pandemic, there's been a lot of new blood coming into the hobby that saw cards as easy money. Project 2020, perfect example of it. Oh, I'm going to buy this for $800 to $900, thinking that I can sell it for $1,600 to $1,700, and then they lose their shirt. We don't know the financial situation of those folks, but you can get pretty reckless with your spending. So this isn't something to take lightly. People's financial situations are different, and we're ultimately not going to sit here and tell you how to spend it. But I think you gave a great set of guidelines on things that people should consider heading into those types of situations. Market dynamics. Switching gears a little bit.
Business ethics.
I mean, we could talk about business ethics if that's where you want to go. But can you let our viewers know out there how you go about making your buying decisions? I know you've been a little bit of a chameleon lately, from jumping from Project 2020 to dabbling a little bit of soccer and basketball. And now we got a fossil jungle Pokemon craze, picking up some stuff there. So could you tell us a little bit about what goes into sort of your next adventure, how you approach it? No state secrets giving away here. We're just looking for a general thought process.
Sure. So I've talked about this in many previous videos, where I've always tried to hone in on market inefficiencies. And this doesn't reflect a lot of what you were just saying, the Pokemon move, the basketball move. That is more for something else, which I'll explain in my second half of this answer. But
okay,
the market inefficiencies, and they could come in many different flavors, and you can't be new to the hobby and point those out. You got to really know what to look for. And the more I've done this, the better I've gotten at it, the better I've gotten at spotting those things. And, it helps having a network of people like you, B-Roth6, to kind of, express that stuff, to get ideas, bounce ideas off one another and get some feedback. But market inefficiency could be targeting a player, and that player might have different products or different parallels within a set, and one is out of whack. There's a multiplier of, or maybe Topps Heritage chrome refractors don't adjust to the price swings as fast as Topps Flagship or the Bowman Chrome Auto. So you're able to get a jump on that, where that might take 5-6 days to adjust after Tatis, if he has like a 2 Grand Slam performance or something, just making that up. But that's one of the flavors of market inefficiencies. You also have, within a set or a product, you have 2 very similar players. So Ronald Acuna, Juan Soto. Ronald Acuna at one point was selling for almost double, maybe 1.5 times Soto. Was that warranted? Maybe it is, but right now it's certainly not. And those prices have definitely reflected that. You see the prices being pretty close to even at this point between those 2 players. And also Soto having far fewer rookie cards definitely deserves to be up there. So back to the market inefficiency. So another flavor of that would be you have within a card itself, you have multiple grades that are out there. Recently, I picked up a Devin Booker Silver Prism and a BGS 9.5 with very strong subgrades. And that was less from Facebook, and that was like $500 less than a PSA 9 version of that card. So and you can't always look at one sale, because with eBay, often there's shield listings, there's outliers, there's bogus data. So that's a risk, but you can look at plenty of other data to say, okay, well, that 9 maybe went for too much, but the BGS 9.5 is still really, really cheap. And I was able to sell that card and make at least $1,000 after fees within 3 weeks. And by the time when I bought it, I think he was still in the bubble. When I sold it, he was out. So, you can get away with stuff like that. And this year with basketball, a lot of people say like, oh, the guys that went down are the ones that are out of the bubble. That wasn't always the case. Actually, LeBron's cards started to go down when he was a favorite to make it to the NBA Finals, and then they win the finals, and his prices go down from where they were a week or 2 before that. So a lot of people have gotten more savvy with anticipating the hype. With guys that are getting into the Hall of Fame, you don't wait till the day they get in and then sell Derek Jeter. This year, the smart play would be to sell his cards 2 or 3 weeks before he got in, or still hold them because they were still probably undervalued at that point. But another flavor, the last flavor of market inefficiency would be you might find different prices across platforms. After a while, I spot this across ComC and across eBay. And you have to be careful with this, because a lot of the times the inefficiency doesn't correct the way you want it to. Sometimes the price on what you deem to be like the benchmark card, that retraces, then you're like, oh, so the one that I bought was actually properly valued this whole time. So the market inefficiencies, that's what I've done a lot of in the past. That's like the opportunistic type plays. What I've tried to do more recently is actually treat my card inventory as more of like a investment portfolio. So instead of looking at it from a card by card basis, and I was able to profit off this one good, or I have a goal of 60% on these 5 cards I just bought, or I'm going to hold these 5 cards for 4 months each and see how I do. It's more about like after I sell those cards, what do I have left in my portfolio? Think about it. If everybody wants to treat this as an investment, well, let's treat it like your portfolio. Do you have strong names? Do you have a well-balanced portfolio? Do you have the right correlations? Do you have the right exposures across with assets, with securities like stocks? You want to look at different instruments, debt. You want to look at different countries. You want to look at different, growth versus value versus blend, etc. With baseball cards, there's similar things you can look at exposures for. They're different, but the different sets, Bowman Chrome versus Topps Flagship, different eras of cards. You've got vintage. You've got guys from the early 2000s who have done quite well. Yadier Pujols, Ichiro, etc. Miguel Cabrera, if he's not already there. Versus the guys of today that have much more risk. You could look at exposures across dollar values of cards, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Sometimes the more expensive cards will be a little bit less risky and will maybe have a greater return potential as well in some cases. You want to look at maybe you could do exposures across the types of players. So you have your GOATs, the Mike Trouts, you have your prospects, you have your established veterans like your Francisco Lindors, Nolan Arenados, you have your emerging veterans, slightly younger. You could even do it across pitchers and hitters for baseball. For football, you can do it across running backs and QBs. Running backs, a lot of people think are undervalued maybe at this point. Maybe they think that it'll reverse a little. It seemed to a few months ago. I'm not sure if that stayed, but this is all very interesting to look at with football. Also, you have defensive players who have been perpetually undervalued. Will that ever change? I don't know. I'm not saying it will. I'm saying these are things you might want to bet on. And some of the more important things I haven't even mentioned yet. So exposures to the players themselves. Do you want too much concentration risk to a guy that, which I do, Mike Trout, who there's rumors of him taking HGH and getting a waiver from the MLB, it's all very scary stuff. If any, and the MLB should cover that up, and it's their best interest to do that, of course. But you never know what's going to happen. Maybe Albert Pujols gets busted for PD soon. You just never know. So concentration risk is important. You want to, and then exposures across different grading companies. A lot of people think BGS 9.5s are undervalued because it's the same thing as a 10. Well, that gap has widened, and just on that alone, if you had your entire portfolio in BGS 9.5s. Versus, and maybe you picked all the right players and all the right sets and all the right everything else, all the right eras, but you messed up on that. So that really took a toll portfolio. And the grade too, not just the company, but the grade of the card is important. The sport. Right now, it's almost like there's and you probably know this saying, it's 90% of your portfolio isn't determined by stock picking. It's determined by the composites, the markets, the asset classes that you invest in themselves, really. It's almost like the same thing here with basketball versus baseball. If you pick basketball, even if you didn't get all the right players, if you did 50 percentile versus the other guys that had all basketball portfolios, you probably still destroyed people that were 100% baseball and did a really good job this year. So that's all very important. And the same thing would have went for soccer if you had those guys if you started buying them the first season or two of 2020. So for me, I'm trying to do a little bit more of that and trying to, okay, I could sell this. And me and you, we know more than anybody that a profit is not realized until you sell the card. Unrealized gain loss. You can look at those prices on eBay and you can smile all you want. You can tell your wife oh, this card's worth 4 times as much now. But if you don't have the money for it, then it's not real. And we've talked about risk, especially with the modern cards. Things change on a dime, and it might not have anything to do with that player's performance. It could just have to do general market factors. Right now, we're dealing with people waiting for the next stimulus, unemployment checks ending, maybe political tensions, and that's clearly not having a positive effect. People are running out of money to spend on cards, which is actually kind of scary because there's a lot of cards that are going to be coming back from grading companies soon that won't be able to find a home because nobody's going to be buying them. But that's a separate issue. So the card or the player considerations have become a little bit secondary to me, where I would seek out I like Austin Meadows, and let's buy a black parallel of his because I think that could have room to grow as long as I think I could get a good deal on it. Might be some market inefficiency at play, comparing him with a similar player or comparing that with similar grades, etc. But I'm trying to treat my portfolio, and with this, I've become more long-term in nature. still selling a lot of cards within 12 months, but there's a lot that I intend to hold for much longer than that.
Now, the next statement I'm about to make might sound a little hyperbolic, but that monologue, that diatribe is the single most insightful piece of information that I have consumed in terms of hobby content this entire year. So we could do 2 or 3 separate sessions on everything you said in there. But I think a couple key themes to take away is you want to look at your holdings, your collection, your portfolio of cards in totality. You want to look at those attributes, see where your risk is, see where you want to be, and then go from there. Ultimately, the world is your oyster, and you can form the collection that you want. There's no hard set rules, but all the information that you gave to the viewers that are lucky enough to come upon this video, some great guidelines and some great things to think about. So
yeah, one last thing with that, there's a behavioral finance bias called the disposition effect, and it's where investors tend to sell winners too early and hold losers for too long. What's going to be your after that? What's it going to look like after you sell Trout? How will those exposures really change? Your portfolio, year over year growth isn't going to be as great once you sell that card, perhaps. So maybe you should hold on to the winner, and then get rid of the undervaluing security, take a loss on it, and replace it with just a better performing security, or in this case, card. Something you feel more confident about, something that better fits into your portfolio, into your longer term plan.
You see that all the time in fantasy sports. We got a first round pick, a la Trent Richardson, who we drafted 2nd or 3rd overall. That's an absolute bum. But because we drafted him so early, we're invested in his future. So we don't want to cut our losses and take the L and move on. But we're running a little long and we're up against it. So I want to hit you with a couple rapid fire questions to close it out. Number 1, if you could change one thing right now about the card hobby landscape, what would it be?
I'll mention 2 things real quick. First one is, there's really 3 things. First of all, drain the swamp, get rid of the bad apples. There's a lot of crappy people in this industry.
Oh, the bad content creators?
Won't go that far, but maybe. But the second thing would be to, it would be helpful, speaking about baseball and maybe the other sports as well, to have competition, to have multiple manufacturers. I would create some beneficial competition for us, pricing pressure, and also innovation pressure as well. The last thing would be, I'm going to be very unpopular in my opinion here, but I want higher grading costs. I thought that the 50-cent increase last December from $8 to $8.50, which, mind you, didn't even affect everybody that was submitting. I thought that was ridiculous. I would like to control the population of cards. And this is all of us, me, you, we're all taking advantage of it because the money's free and easy. And it's the hot potato. There's so many different cards out there that none of us intend to ever hold forever. We have no attachment to it. We have multiple copies of it. But the guy, and there will be somebody, unless all these cards end up in a landfill somewhere, there will be a sucker that ends up with these cards at the end of the road when the hype train on that player is gone, once the bubble crashes, which predominantly affects base cards that are mass produced, that are graded 10s or 9s. It's going to hurt a lot of people, and that's going to hurt the hobby because we're going to lose a lot of people from that. So I think increasing the cost of grading would make that correction happen a little bit sooner, and again, put some controls, some ceilings on the total amount of cards that get submitted.
For sure. We'll see the hatred in the comments below. Favorite can't miss content creator?
Philmington. Just kidding. Elite Co 3.
Don't you mean Phil from Philmington?
Elite Co 3. Although I bet people will actually agree with this that watch Elite Co 3, he knows so much about the hobby. I just wish he picked a little bit more from his brain and shared it to all of us. But still, his channel is more insightful than 99% of the ones out there. So you can try to hide his secrets, but we still learn a lot from him.
For sure. I'll try and put a card in here somewhere. We had Elite Co 3 on Sports Card Academy a couple episodes ago. Next rapid fire question. Where do you see the hobby in 10 years?
Who knows? I mean, hopefully it grows. It would suck for a few of us. I see more parallels, as I mentioned earlier, with the asset management industry and like the technology, the innovative ideas, all these apps that are out there. I mentioned benchmarks, composites, more risk analytics, data licenses, better data, faster data, a push towards more strides towards the securitization of sports cards as an alternative asset. Maybe at that point we have a market cap. We're able to compare it to the fine art industry, as well as cryptocurrencies. And might still be smaller than both of those at that point, but at least we'll have a dollar figure on it. And you mentioned actual securities, funds, stuff like that. Fractional ownership is something that's not going to go away. I'm not prepared to speak on that because I'm still trying to digest it, but that's something that's probably going to continue to take over the industry, and certainly affect prices of not everything, but some of the stuff I guess. With baseball, I think there'll be more products. There's already a lot today, but we won't go into it, but there's a reason why Topps keeps on introducing more and more products. And that is actually, I think, ensuring sustainability of the hobby, because that allows them to not jack up print runs on like the known 5 or 6 products that retain their value year over year, which they still have to increase print runs of, because people are smart and seek out those products. And with that comes more manufactured scarcity, the different shimmers, waves, inserts, etc. You'll see more of that for sure. We didn't talk about it, but like this retail issue, it's an issue to me because it bugs other people. I don't want people to leave the hobby because they can't afford a blaster box anymore. But unfortunately, those days I think are over. I know I was listening to an interview somebody was doing with a Panini rep who said, we're trying to address that situation. Clearly, people have seen retail being pulled away from retail stores. There's really, if you look at like cost benefit analysis for those retail stores, doesn't make sense for like Walmart and Target to really even have them at this point, based on all the issues that come with that. Unfortunately, that problem will be solved probably somewhat soon, but it's not going to be a solution a lot of people like. I think hobby shops might get in control of those products and sell them for more, or Topps will sell them directly. You're not going to get them for $20 easy again. That's just the fact of the matter of, Topps and Panini trying to capitalize and capture as much as the profit share as possible. And they, of all entities in the hobby, guess what? They deserve it more than anybody else. MLB and Topps makes this happen more than everybody else, and Topps deserves it. MLB already gets paid a shit ton for the license, so I'm okay with it. And to be honest, I'm okay with the situation right now. Instead of Topps getting rich off it, people are getting rich off. It's probably not the same people. Maybe people with bots are getting lucky, but either way, I'm not going to be able to capitalize off that. So it doesn't really affect me unless people get so fed up with not being able to afford it. Maybe kids aren't able to get into it, which kids don't watch baseball anyways, but that's probably a concern for Topps for sure. So the retail thing, and last year, you have to think about like where we were last year, where it was really, the conversation was all around hobby prices and hobby distributors. People were complaining about, and now they had too much leverage, and they were causing the LCSs to jack up prices in order to keep the same margin. And that's true. So we were complaining about hobby boxes being too expensive. And now where we can't find blasters, and we're going to give blasters back to the hobby shops that we, had to deal with those increased prices from. It's not going to be something that people want to see. But I think with baseball, basketball, football, you're going to see more products. You're going to see prices continue to increase for wax. Unfortunately, you're going to see a greater proportion of investors and flippers to the true collectors. That is going to happen if prices continue to increase. If this is deemed an investment by more and more people, it's just fact of the matter of, if there's money in something, people will come. So a lot of people will be drawn from that standpoint.
But that's all we got for you guys tonight. Thank you for being on Sports Card Academy, Phil. This has been an absolute pleasure. Our viewers out there are going to get so much out of tonight's conversation. And viewers, let us know in the comments below what you thought of today's discussion. Do you feel better equipped as a collector, as an investor, to go out and make those buying and selling decisions that you haven't been able to pull the trigger on. We'll leave a link in the description below to Phil's channel. Phil, anything else you want to plug before we call it a night?
I'll show you guys a card I picked up today.
Yeah, let's see it.
What everybody's expecting. First edition, 1999, Pokemon Hollow base set.
Wow, look at that.
With A7. Yeah. There's like 15 hollows in the set. It's actually one of the better ones, I think. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, on that note, let us know who your favorite Pokemon is, first edition, original Pokemon only, in the comments below. But that's all we got for you tonight. I'm Cardi-C on Sports Card Academy. We will catch you guys later.